Good evening. Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. Please note that the opinions voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network nor our sponsors. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.
Reaching all the way back to 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition. Here is your host of Fate Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Welcome to Fate Mag Radio here on the WBHM Digital Broadcasting Network out of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, and I am so pleased to be bringing you this show tonight. I think that it's going to be fantastic. It's a little out of my wheelhouse. I love learning. And I'm going to tell you that the gentleman that I'm hosting tonight has such a fascinating background. He is a musician. He is an author of several books, and they're all fascinating. He has been on television. He has on the Travel Channel. I think that you will have seen him if you are into any type of anomalous topic, especially cryptozoology and monsters. And he is involved with Small Town Monsters, which is doing a great job with the films that they're putting out. And if you're not subscribed to them, what are you doing? You have time? Go do it. So without further ado, I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here, Lyle Blackburn. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm actually very excited. I don't get to talk about this subject very often. Most of the people that I know who do what you do are busy out in the field just like you. So trying to get somebody, in the house and get 2 hours of their time can be very difficult. I know that it's a lot to give up, especially on a Sunday evening, and I appreciate that. And we have someone in chat that says, blow my mind, Lyle.
Okay, I'll give it my best shot.
Well, I want to know, first of all, you're a musician and your band is Ghoultown, am I right?
Right.
And the person that takes your promo photos is fabulous. I just want to put that out there. I know there are a couple of people because I saw the copyrights, but they do a great job. But you do a great job with that too.
Oh, thanks. Well, having been a professional musician for quite some time, photos and all that were part of it. So when I started writing books and doing research and things like this, I was already kind of ahead of the curve on the promotional side, if you will.
That has to help. When I started doing this with Paranormal Experienced 5 years ago, I had no clue how to do any of that or any of this. So I think that you've done a fantastic job, and it's not just self-promotion. The work that you're doing is getting you the attention. You're considered an expert in your field.
Yeah, true. It's always kind of resulted from, I guess, the people liking the books or the way I do the research and what I've offered in the way of historical accounts and what have you. So, yeah, that's always kind of been the basis for, television calling and things like that. It's all kind of come from what is the core of the research and what I've offered in books and magazine articles and things like that. So I can always appreciate that because it really does come from the research and not just that I have a good photo or something.
Or a good voice or, the whole package, as it were. But when you started to do would this is considered cryptozoology, right? Because monsters are not the norm. Would it fall into that field?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, to me, there's no accreditation for being a cryptozoologist. One cannot go and get a degree. You could get a degree in biology or zoology or something, but since there's no accreditation, it's sort of just one of those things where people either adopt the title or people bestow it upon you. And when I first started doing things like this, and my first book was The Beast of Boggy Creek, which covered the history and phenomenon of a creature seen in southern Arkansas that was made famous by the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. The thing was called the Fouke Monster, and it's essentially a Bigfoot-like creature. But the term monster is something people respond to and something TV likes to put out there. But and I never set out to be a cryptozoologist. It just was a title that sort of encompassed what I did and the research and the fact that I did go into the field and research, on my own. That, you just get the title. So I accept it on the terms of, I suppose I earned it. I don't know, but I didn't.
I would think.
Set out to become that.
Well, the people who go after research-wise and evidentiary-wise the things that you do, I mean, you can almost count the ones who are known to be reputable, who have a great history, who have such a strong background on your hands. I know that I've been fortunate enough to talk to a couple of people who do this and do it well as well. But I think that legend hunter, as you use, is probably a much better descriptive phrase. I like that because I've been fortunate enough to interview people who were involved with different monster experiences. A lot of these are only one-time things, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, some of the cases can be quite focused or narrow with a few sightings, and some can have hundreds of sightings. So yeah, and in terms of the numbers of cases and what there is to research, it varies widely.
Well, I know that that Flatwoods monster was reportedly seen one night, but it had a very strong effect on the people that saw it. And I was just curious because I've read somebody who was trying to explain what had happened, and for no apparent reason say that they felt that it was a paratrooper who had gotten tangled up in his chute, and it was billowing behind him, and the headlights and everything just made the people who were already scared convinced that a monster was chasing them. And I thought, well, it wouldn't glow unless they had like a headlamp, and then it would have to be a bodacious headlamp. People try to debunk things every time there's an experience, don't they?
Well, and yes, and I think that's in some ways a good thing to do, not necessarily to approach it to debunk it, but to rule out ordinary things that could have caused it. But, in the case of the Flatwoods monster, which, was something that occurred back in the 50s, that was like literally one incident in which multiple people witnessed some kind of a entity or a mechanical thing or something associated with a object that fell from the sky. So that's one that became very famous based on just an incident. Whereas some of them, the Fouke monster, for example, there was, I've logged literally hundreds of sightings. But in all these cases, you certainly have people who come from both sides, whether they're believers or skeptics, and one will try to debunk it while the others will try to convince you. And neither party usually has much to go on except gut instinct or what have you. So I think the best researchers, and the ones that I know, and usually we don't have an agenda to try to prove or disprove. We're just trying to gather up all the information and try to make, an educated guess as to what it might have been. And with no agenda to try to make you believe or disbelieve. It's just to present the best we can in terms of what that case has to offer. And then, everybody's opinion is valid. But certainly there's better opinions than others. In the case of Flatwoods, I mean, this object fell from the sky, though it wasn't a plane by all accounts. And what was it that supposedly parachuted out of it? If it was a human, that's a hard one to explain, but that comes up even in the Mothman case, paratroopers, and that's always kind of thrown in there in these kind of cases.
Well, I think that the description of what the Flatwoods monster was wearing was what led this gentleman to that conclusion, with the shininess of the clothes. But I don't know, because when I set up to do my interview with Andrew Smith, who is the historian in that area, it was just research that I was doing, preparing for the interview, because I do work to do these, and I just was like, that sounds like a stretch, But, as you said, you don't approach this seeking to bring your own opinions and conclusions, because that's not an investigation. That's a different ballgame. But to follow the evidence and find where it takes you, that is what investigating is. And that's what you do.
Yeah, and in the case of the Flatwoods monster, I mean, the descriptions and the observations by the witnesses, even though they were young, we're fairly certain it wasn't just a person or a paratrooper. And the best way to get a perspective for yourself is the Small Town Monsters documentary done about that case. And in that case, you can listen to some of the original witnesses that were there. And, that's the best source of information, obviously, is because they were there. So at any point where we can interview a first person definitely gives a better perspective, as opposed to something written on the internet or third or fourth generation, So, in any case, try to trace it back or to watch a reputable documentary or read a book, and it's the best amount of information possible.
Well, it is. And I read your books. I read Nick Redfern's, David Weatherly's, a lot of people, because this is something that fascinates me. I haven't come across anything, but I'm always interested, and I'm always wanting to see what's out there. It's, like I said, it's most people's nightmare, but it's still fascinating. It's, when y'all go out into the field, I sometimes wonder, what are you thinking? Especially when I'm going back and reading through some of the various topics that even go beyond monsters. It's just like, oh my goodness, you thought that was a good idea. And it is, because it gets the evidence, but I'm not sure that I'm as brave sometimes. Actually, I know I am, but I chase different things. But it's amazing. Y'all do such a good job with that.
Well, thank you. I mean, if it's not dangerous, it doesn't make for interesting things in books, and it doesn't often put you in the places where a creature, for example, like Bigfoot, may in fact live if they do exist. So, these are part of part of it. And I mean, I've some of the researchers have gone abroad into even more, what I consider more dangerous places, especially in countries whose laws and governments are not are not safe unto themselves, much less the creature. So there's all levels of danger in this. If one is to go into the swamps or rainforests or woods, but to me, if I'm writing a book on a subject, and for example, the lizard man of Bishopville, South Carolina, if I don't go to that swamp and tromp around in it and have a look around, there's no way that I can get a good perspective on the case, or to see what I can see, not necessarily assuming I can see the creature, but just to get a good feel of the area and what it can offer in terms of remoteness and things like that. So by virtue of that, you just end up in these like very creepy and dangerous places, as I have many times, but it's kind of exhilarating and, a lot of fun at the end of the day, as long as I survive, of course.
Well, there's always that, and I'm glad you have so far. So I'm sure I'm not the only person. But Brenda in chat said there's a lizard man in South Carolina. There's these creatures of various genetics are everywhere, aren't they?
Well, there's if you get into the reptilian topic, there's kind of several aspects of that. Is sort of the reptilians among us type things, shape-shifting creatures, and then within extraterrestrial UFO, you sort of have these extraterrestrial reptilians. And then in terms of cryptozoology, you have reports of just some sort of a bipedal reptilian creature that has, usually near swampy areas or watery areas. And there was a very famous group of incidents that occurred in the late 80s in Bishopville, South Carolina. And so if you type in Bishopville, South Carolina, among those hits, you're going to see Lizard Man. And it was something that was heavily covered in the media. I mean,
wow.
Dan Rather and CBS News, and people were coming down there covering this in the summer of '88 because it was just such a weird case. Basically, a kid claimed to have been attacked by this reptilian creature, and I mean, sort of a creature from the Black Lagoon in modern times. And so I always loved that case. And my second book, I went out there to South Carolina and visited with the retired police sheriff and looked through the police files, of which they had a lot of police files on this thing, and went into the skateboard swamp and did the whole thing. So my second book actually covered that. Mm-hmm. And then I've returned since.
That's beyond Boggy Point, right?
No, that was Lizard Man.
Lizard Man. I'm sorry.
And so, it's something and quite famous in that area of South Carolina. They even had a Lizard Man festival. And when I was there, they had me on the local news station, like for an interview. And, it's just part of the culture almost. Everybody that lived in that area at the time all remembers, I remember the Lizard Man sightings. And it just was a very, very strange phenomenon, and one that obviously remains unsolved, but one that to me is just truly fascinating and, monstrous in a modern world.
I'm sorry that I missed that, but you're so prolific with your writing.
Right. Well, yeah,
it's hard to keep up sometimes. And I've been trying to, because Momo coming out, I'm so excited about that. That's the Missouri Monster. I'm so excited about that because this is a new topic for me. And I live in Alabama, where we have the Alabama White Thing, which is either or. But I also live near the Talladega Forest, where there is so much Bigfoot activity reported. And we have Jonathan Odom here, who does all kinds of investigations and has great evidence. But So this is something that I'm trying to get educated about and get into a bit. But we're at our first break. So if you'll bear with me, we'll be right back, guys.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I am joined tonight by Lyle Blackburn, author, legend hunter. He is definitely a Renaissance man when it comes to, he does everything. Musician, television personality, and mainly a great conversationalist because I am so enjoying this show so far. Lyle, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
We have a question in chat that says, the experiences with some of these monsters, could it be something? One chat room says misunderstood creatures, perhaps, and then the other chat has someone that actually at the same time said, like the people who have that condition that grows hair all over them, including the face, like a birth defect that got misreported or something of that nature. I found that interesting. That came up in both chats that are not connected whatsoever. So I'm going to ask. Apparently people are curious about that. What are the odds of something reptilian or a Bigfoot type of thing being an individual like that?
That has hypertrichosis, the hair?
Yes. Or the scaling.
Oh, yes. Well, that's certainly, I mean, these are the kind of things that you certainly have to consider in order to explain away, what may be unusual, but still, an earthly condition, or a normal condition. So, yeah, those are the kind of things, like especially in the lizard man case, you had witnesses who got a look at what they described as a entity that looked anthropomorphic, which is humanoid,
Right.
had 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, and said it was brownish or green and scaly looking. And the sightings, weren't long sightings. I mean, usually if you see something like that, it's coming at you, or they're running, or this kid was running from it, or it frightens you. So you don't get a long look at it. So you kind of have to think, well, could it have been a human who had this condition? But you also have to consider that living in the wild in a swamp is extremely difficult. If this is a naked person just roaming around, they're definitely not going to look greenish. They may look brownish from mud. I mean, it could literally be a feral human. So you can't rule it out, but it seems fairly unlikely. But when you interview multiple witnesses, or in the case of the lizard man, I had actual police affidavits written in the handwriting of witnesses, which you don't very often have in these cases, because police usually just laugh it off, or they're not going to take a statement. But the sheriff, Liston Truesdale, who was in office at the time in the Lee County Sheriff's Office, he kind of took it seriously enough in terms of people are seeing something, and I should document it. And so in reading those statements, and I've interviewed some of the original witnesses, you put those things together, and you just kind of have to make your best educated guess. And I don't think what they saw was a human, even with a condition of scaly skin. But I couldn't 100% rule it out either. So that's a great question, and one of those things that you're always going to look at in terms of science and trying to explain what it is people saw.
Well, there's so many possibilities, I guess, especially with a high volume of incidents reported, as in that case, comparatively speaking. I know that I have seen people who they didn't bathe appropriately for whatever reason, and it was when I used to do volunteer work, and sometimes their skin would get bubbled, for lack of a better term. It's not bubbles like blisters, but bubbles like lumpy skin. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to ask that question, because I've seen humans do that, but it would take a very long time to cover you to the point that you looked like a lizard. It's just not, especially if you were immersing in water, and that would be a kind of cleansing. Anyway.
I mean, survival with somebody with that condition, with kind of an open sore and that sort of living in those swamps would be hard enough just in, as a fit,
yes,
not physically fit person, but to subject yourself to that condition and to survive in the wild in a swamp would be pretty difficult. So, that's kind of what I felt about it, as far as giving it a human explanation to cover all the sightings. But
it's logical. I mean, you go to what are the possibilities of someone surviving in a swamp, period, because of all the predators that lived there, and then being able to survive the murky waters and diseases that are rampant in that kind of environment too. It's just amazing that anything quasi-human would survive, period. But to have something be able to chase you and be, aggressive or at least assertive enough to come and see what you are, I've got to say, I would turn and run. I hate to think that I'm such a big wuss, but I think I would probably turn and run.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't blame you on that. I mean, if you look at the story from Christopher Davis, one of the most sensational sightings of the Bishopville Lizard Man, I mean, he had got a flat tire near Skateboard Swamp late at night, 2 a.m., and just about the time he finished changing the tire, he looked up and he could see this figure coming at him in the moonlight there's a kind of some fennel grass that grows up on the top part of this swampy ground. And, just even thinking that's a person would have been scary enough because you're in the middle of nowhere. It's like, who would be out there? And so his initial reaction was fright just from that. And then as the thing got closer, he said he realized it wasn't a human. It was something that appeared to be covered in scaly skin. It was brownish or greenish and had red eyes and 3 fingers with claws on the end. And I mean, as he jumped in his little Celica to get it started up, this thing tried to reach in through the window and grab him.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, this was something
No, thank you. And I don't know that I would have trusted a Celica. I used to have one. And those things, claws could open that.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's a small car. So, but, this is just a kid, a working kid, and that's what he had. But it frightened him so bad that, he didn't immediately go to the police. There was some other incidents that ended up getting in the newspaper several weeks later that ended up prompting him and his dad urged him to go to the police with this because they thought it may be connected to sightings of what people were calling the Lizard Man in the area. So, it was just such a traumatizing experience. He didn't want to tell anybody. So it was only by just strange circumstances that he ended up in the sheriff's office. And from there, that's when that whole media sensation exploded. Once his story gets in the newspaper, you can only imagine the reaction because this was, not only a lizard man, but seemed to be attacking people.
Yes,
so
aggressive.
It was crazy.
It's so fascinating to me that these things have like a time period. We have Carl in chat was a moment ago when we were talking about the Missouri monster, said Momo's been in Missouri for years. Are there still incidents of the lizard man being reported?
Not much. In terms of that case, and you're right, sometimes there's just this flap that occurs in a month or a few months or within a year, and then it's sort of gone. And the Bishopville Lizard Man is along those lines. There was later sightings within a year or two later, which I documented, but after that, you don't get a lot of reports, and it's hard to really explain why. Perhaps the creature, if it is a creature, it moves on for whatever reason, and this occurs in other Bigfoot cases, Momo cases, where Momo is the main Momo famous case, back in the 1972 was very concentrated within a short period of time. And then after that, the sightings sort of died off. But however, you still get Bigfoot sightings throughout Missouri. And pretty much if you see a Bigfoot in Missouri, it's just become to where people call it a Momo. Just that's the famous kind of name for a Missouri Bigfoot. So some of these cases go on and some of them just end very briefly.
Well, the people in chat are all back on the Lizard Man. Said that, probably scared the car as well. An oil leak, probably. And I'm like, oh, y'all are crazy. But Swanee said, well, if there was any damage to the car, they would have had to file a police report. And Brenda said DNA scraped off the window edge. But, this was the 80s. That was not go-to technology at that point.
True. And ironically, with the Lizard Man case, the incident that first got in the newspaper was actually a car which looked like it had been attacked by an animal. And the sheriff's office was called down there, and the deputies went down there and couldn't make anything out of it and called the sheriff. And that's as the sheriff was down there interviewing people trying to figure out what happened to this car, that's when people came forward and said maybe it was the Lizard Man. And he's like, "What do you mean the Lizard Man?" And that's when that got in the newspaper. So there was an association between car damage and this Lizard Man, and there was 3 other cases in which cars were damaged over the years. And you're right, in the 80s, nobody was going to do DNA on, over a Lizard Man. The technology was that expensive and only going to be used in, cases that murder or something. But later on, it was done on a car that was in the, I want to say 2007 or something like that, where they did do some analysis over the DNA. In that case, they said it was domestic dog DNA. So that's all it came back as. But yeah, back in those days, it wasn't. You just couldn't do the scientific testing that you probably could now.
Well, I know that I get very impressed with some of the things that I see DNA results coming from nowadays in our fields. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, if they had been able to do this years ago, we would already have answers. And of course, then, some mainstream testing facilities would still come back with, completely human, although there's nothing indicative of should be human. It's just interesting to me. I love sitting back and watching a bit. And sometimes I get opinionated. But I try to keep my opinions at bay and follow the evidence. When you went into that swamp, did you personally go into that swamp in South Carolina?
Yes.
Because you said you were looking at the police reports and stuff. Did you have any experience that brought you to ponder that this really is not an alligator because they're not bipedal, but did you have anything that made you go, this is quite possibly the real deal, other than the police reports? Did you have an experience?
No, when I was there, unfortunately, I didn't experience anything that I could attribute to an unknown. Although, in other places and other times, I've been in areas where there's been sightings and something strange occurs. But, it's kind of, it would have, if I'm out there investigating this in order to write a book, then it may be suspect if I suddenly claim I had seen the creature while, just so happened to have seen the creature or something while I was there. So that would be great. But unfortunately, going into that swamp at that time, it's, nothing strange happened then, but it was, that encompassed other things that I haven't gotten in other cases, like I said, especially with the police involvement. So sometimes all you have is the witnesses and going in the place where it happened. But in this case, you had written police documents, and I scanned a bunch of those in my book and sort of that sort of thing. But that offered a perspective, and really, I wasn't necessarily going to write a book on that. It was kind of funny how that happened, because after I had written The Beast of Boggy Creek and it sold so well, and I was surprised. I just had written the book for my own. I just wanted to know the story behind the legend of Boggy Creek. So that after that, I thought, well, what do I do now? So I did what any average normal person would do. I went on what I called the swamp tour, in which I went all over the Southeast, going to famous swamps that had associated strange activity, like Honey Island Swamp and Skateboard Swamp, and places like that. And when I was in Bishopville, I was interviewing the police, and all of a sudden I was interviewing a historian down at this archive place, and the newspaper showed up, and about the time I got home from the so-called swamp tour, they send me an article in the newspaper. It says, "Writer plans to write book on Lizard Man." So I was like, well, I had done all the research and I'd spent time out there and been in the swamp and all that. But I thought, well, I guess I'm writing a book on it because it's in the paper. And so that's how it happened.
Nothing like gaining an impetus from an unknown source, right? Providence.
Yeah, sometimes that's the kind of direction you just kind of think especially when you get out there and you do active investigations and things, or then the path will kind of become clear, because you're out there. I'm not just Googling stuff or whatever. I'm literally driving across America to a place where I find a fascinating legend like Momo or whatever, and when you do that, you always find that, it sort of directs your path. So that's a fun part of this whole thing.
I think so too. I love when fate steps in, as it were, and you find yourself doing something that you would never 6 months before thought would even be a possibility. And it's just like, oh, look what we're doing. This is crazy, but okay. I think that I would just never have made it out of that swamp if I were changing a tire and looked up and something was coming at me like that. They would have just had me right there. I'd have died from a heart attack. But it's just really cool that you were able to get the information from the police and then in your travels come across other things. Do you think that you would have gone on to be such a prolific writer if you hadn't had that nudge from the universe with the Lizard Man?
Well, perhaps not. I mean, it definitely helps in terms of getting that push and the good feedback, and people find out that people are interested in what you're doing. It's definitely gives the motivation to keep doing it, because always, I've been a musician most all of my life, and I had a talent for writing, so I did that a lot on the side, working for music magazines and horror magazines and things. So I was good at writing. So I thought, in terms of writing the book, I always wanted to write a book, but I thought that sounds so boring, like sitting there writing a book. I never quite envisioned the type of book writing that if I start investigating these strange legends and cases, of which I had always been fascinated with, that it led me to adventure, and swamps and interviewing people who literally say they saw some, unexplainable creature or phenomenon. Then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, this is cool, because while I do have to spend time sitting at home writing, it's just part of the process of this adventure. So all of that
Balance.
Put together, right? I think that's the push that has kept me writing books, of which
I'm so glad it did.
It's certainly not the money. I mean, this doesn't have an audience on the level of romantic romance novels or even horror fiction or what have you. But it's just what I like to do, and I have the response to my books has been so good that it just keeps you fired up to keep doing it.
Absolutely. And we are up against a break. We will be right back, everyone, with Lyle Blackburn, and y'all join us.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour. Welcome back. You are listening to Fate Mag Radio. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, and my guest tonight is Lyle Blackburn, and I am having such a great time learning so much. So, Lyle, I know that what you do is fascinating. We were talking about your books and them not being quite the fan of, the fan base of like a Joan Collins novel or something of that nature, or heaven forbid, Danielle Steele, right? Everybody wants that fan base. But I think that you do pretty great because the field that you are writing about has such a large following. I think it's awesome.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I certainly think the people who, buy and read the books and study this type of stuff are more involved, I think. It's not just, like, okay, I just read this fiction on a plane and sort of a thing. It's something that people study and will read over and over, or take it, guys have said they take some of my books into the field, the Boggy Creek books or Beyond Boggy Creek that kind of covers a lot of the southern Sasquatch. Guys have said, they take it in the field and refer back to the history of an area where they may be researching or things like that. So it's almost like a textbook or reference book, as well as something that's entertaining. I try to write in an entertaining fashion, but that's cool. I love that kind of feedback, and it's, you feel good that people like the book enough to, to take it along with them and things like that.
Well, I would do that. I'm always amazed, and I know that you were a contributing author to one of David Weatherly's Woodnox books, and I absolutely love those because I had never even heard of something like that, and then there you go doing all the exploring and expedition type things, and there's so many people that are involved in sharing those. I think it's really, you would be remiss if you were new at doing something like that and hadn't read them and found yourself in the field, because what are you going to do? What's going to happen? You need to know, you need to have an idea of how to cope, because sometimes it's just a response, but sometimes you're being tracked. And you need to recognize that too. So, just my opinion. But I wouldn't go into the woods without having studied and been ready.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've noticed a trend of, I see questions constantly posted on the internet or Facebook or what have you that are like, in terms of Bigfoot, it's asking Bigfoot 101 questions. It's like, and the internet is not, it's like, pick up some of the classic books, Grover Krantz books or John Green books, and read those. And you should know the basis, I guess, for the field that you're studying or so-called researching. So there are things used to be called libraries, but now you can purchase on Amazon or eBay or whatever. But you can get a hold of these books, and it's just sort of like required reading and study up on these things, and then you're at the level of asking some more modern questions or whatever. But I see it constantly, especially in my Boggy Creek books. I mean, I see the same questions posted over and over. It's like, I did years of research. It's all in the book, and
read the book.
It's sort of like that. And I mean, I understand not everybody picks up the books or wants to read the books, but it's out there, and it's oftentimes the answers aren't found on the internet. These are found in the old school printed black and white pages of the reference books and things. So those are important to read. And if you're going to go into research in wooded areas and things like that, you also should read or study or consider, survival and
Yes.
being ready for wooded places if you're not like a seasoned hunter or something. So I see people going off into these places. You just need to know what variety of venomous snakes there are, what pitfalls you may encounter. That's important just as much as knowing the history of the strange things that may have been reported. So those are good things to know when you're going into the field.
Absolutely. Like I said, I live in Alabama. We have every venomous snake except for that red adder that's out in Australia. Okay. But, well, maybe not every single one, but it feels like it. And I have a snake phobia. So I have snake gaiters, and I don't wear just over the calves. I'm full leg snake gaiters because I'm a great big sissy. But I feel better. I can go into the woods if I have them on. You have to know how to take care of yourself because we have cliffs and nooks between cliffs that you can still fit down and break something or not be able to get out of, and people won't know how to find you because there's no cell service. They can't, find my phone doesn't work there. You have to know how to take care of yourself and don't go alone.
Right.
So,
yeah. You got to kind of think about those aspects of it.
And have you been in the UK doing this? Because we have a question about Yorkshire.
No, I've played band gigs in the UK and recorded albums there, but I've never done any cryptid research there.
Okay. Well, the question was about the Yorkshire moors, about strange creatures being reported there. But, you can research that. And I'm probably 80% sure that Nick Redfern has something through that. Or perhaps not. Perhaps we'll find someone else who does. But that's a good starting point. And, I am always so impressed by the level of people that I see at so many of these conferences you go to. Where would you suggest someone who is interested in learning more about this, once they've read the books and they're getting a basic knowledge, where would they go as far as finding one of y'all to speak with or hear lecture? I know that there's the Mothman Festival for flying things, but what's your favorite place to speak at that you feel, that's probably going to get you in trouble?
Well, I mean, there's it's hard to pick a favorite. I mean, they're all cool events, and there's been more and more of these cryptid related events that have popped up over the years. I mean, there's been some long running Bigfoot conferences. The Ohio Bigfoot Conference is a really great one. The Texas Bigfoot Conference, and then so smaller ones have popped up everywhere. I mean, there's Tennessee.
I saw you in Pensacola. That Pensacon.
Yeah, I mean that was a like a Comic-Con thing. Sometimes I'm a guest at those kind of events, but it's cool because I'm usually there to speak about my books or cryptozoology, and those are great audiences because they just are fascinated and want to know, ask question after question. So those are cool panels. So you just kind of research. It's hard. There's no master list of cryptid events. I mean, there's ones in Kentucky and Tennessee and Florida and the Mothman Festival in West Virginia. So you kind of have to just search around in your vicinity. I mean, you may not find one in your backyard, but it's worth the drive. I mean, if you find you're into Bigfoot and you're anywhere near, for example, Ohio, go to the Ohio Bigfoot Conference because you're going to get exposure to some speakers there that will, have some great presentations, as well as just the people there that you're going to meet. You can network with. You might find somebody who actually lives near you who either could go out researching with you or would have some tips. And they're good networking places for people
That's
that
what
have
I thought.
like-minded interests. So I would suggest you just got to do some research, or follow guys like, if you follow like me or Ken Gerhardt or Nick Redfern and Dr. Jeff Meldrum and Bob Gimlin, just look at the places where, follow us on the social media. You'll see the places where we're gonna be. So that's a good way to keep up.
Well, I know that when I very first started doing a radio show many moons ago, I was on a network with Bram Parsons, who is from Ohio. And he is basically about all kinds of paranormal things, but he was very involved with the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. I thought that, and with the Mothman Conference as well. And I just found it so interesting because I could listen to him and other people just go on about that for days, and I was always so impressed with it because it's not, I thought it was just people, testosterone driven or whatever, running off to go and find this and rarely succeeding. When I started paying attention and started listening and reading, I realized that, why, yes, there is forensic evidence and there is methodology involved. And, I was lucky enough to speak with someone from Texas as well who is a female, and she educated me tremendously on this type of thing. Her name is Shelley Montana. But it was just amazing to me as time went by how much effort and research is already available if you will just take, like we were talking about, take the time and read the books. Educate yourself. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. It's okay sometimes to follow people like you and Nick and others who are so well versed in the history and part of the history of this phenomenon, the monsters and other things that live in places that we want.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and even with us, I mean, it's like none of us have definitively proved anything. We're knowledgeable in terms of the history and having interviewed a lot of people and in terms of that. So, we hesitate to, and I'm sure the guys will agree in a we sense. So we don't want to dub ourselves experts, but certainly knowledgeable, but we're always listening and learning and, listening to what others' opinions are. And that's the way you kind of get a better perspective of everything is the talking and interaction between like-minded researchers, so that we can bounce ideas, or what do you think about this case or this sighting or whatever. And so we're always also in a learning process, the same as somebody who's just kind of starting to get into it. It's just something that, just by nature of this unexplained phenomenon, that you never, you're always sort of evolving and learning, because it's not like we're examining a specimen on a table. There's no, we're otter experts and we're looking at an otter or whatever. It's
I understand. You're right.
So, those are the things that we all try to keep an open mind and try to keep, learning as we go.
And you do a good job, but we're at our top of the hour break. So, and I am going to say before we go that people who a lot of others consider experts would never use that term about themselves, because they know that in a field such, any anomalous field, it's tough to be an expert on something that you don't have something to show. But there are those that I trust as sources, and y'all would be them. But we will be back after this news break. This is going to be a few minutes, so go ahead, stretch your legs, maybe toss a few cartwheels out there, fill up your beer steins, your mugs. Just enjoy, stretch, and come back for the next hour with Lyle Blackburn. This is Fate Mag, and thank you for being here.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, Old Edwards Inn and Spa in downtown Highlands, North Carolina, a European-style luxury mountain resort. The Romantic Mountain Escape Package includes 2 nights with spa credits and dinner. More information at oldedwardsinn.com.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. At least 10 people are dead in a fiery crash at an airport near Dallas this morning. The Federal Aviation Administration says the Beechcraft King Air 350 hit an unoccupied hangar at Addison Municipal Airport during takeoff and that the fire was quickly extinguished. The FAA says investigators are on the scene trying to determine the cause of this crash. President Trump says negotiations have restarted with North Korea over the country's nuclear programs. The announcement came after Trump became the first U.S. president to step into the North for a photo shoot and a meeting with Kim Jong-un. As NPR's Bobby Allen reports, it's not clear how the Trump administration plans to strike a deal with the rogue nation.
Talks with North Korea failed earlier this year in Hanoi after Trump refused to ease sanctions before the North commits to taking major steps to dismantle its nuclear arsenal. This time could be different, though. Trump said things can happen when asked if economic sanctions would be scaled back on the North while a deal is in the works.
NPR's Bobby Allen. Security forces in Sudan continue to crack down on protesters who have taken to the streets of the capital city of Khartoum. Halima Gakandi reports at least 7 people have been killed.
Defiant activists filled the streets of the capital city of Khartoum on Sunday in what is being called the Millions March. It's the first major demonstration in weeks after Sudanese military forces violently dispersed protesters earlier this month, killing more than 100 people. The massacre brought an end to negotiations between opposition protesters and the military, which ousted Sudan's former president in April. But the violence against protesters continues. One activist in Khartoum told NPR that he saw live ammunition and tear gas. Protesters continue to call for justice for those killed and an immediate transition to civilian-led rule. For NPR News, I'm Halima Gikandi in Nairobi, Kenya.
Just a day after Republicans ended a walkout that shut down the state legislature for more than a week, the Senate was once again delayed today, but this time by Democrats, demanding a Republican senator who threatened state police in Oregon be barred from the Senate floor. Lauren Dake from Oregon Public Broadcasting has more.
The walkout is over, but the tension in the Oregon State Senate remains high. Before Republican Senator Brian Boquist went into hiding, he told state troopers they should, quote, come heavily armed, end quote, if they plan to come after him. Now Boquist is back at the state capitol. Some Democrats say his threat to state troopers warrants barring him from the floor. He says that's an overreaction.
If people are worried, they shouldn't be. That's why we have state police here. They do a fine job.
One Democrat walked out herself to protest Boquist's presence. Without all the Democrats on the floor, they could lose priority bills. Under the state constitution, the legislature has until midnight tonight to finish their business and adjourn. For NPR News, I'm Lauren Dake in Salem, Oregon.
And you're listening to NPR News from Washington. Tens of thousands rallied in support of police in Hong Kong today, filling a park in front of the legislature, chanting thank you. This as the territory readies itself for the 22nd anniversary of the former British colony's return to China on Monday. Police have been criticized for using tear gas and rubber bullets that left dozens of protesters injured on June 12th. Scientists at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee are studying human disease genes in plants. NPR's Joe Palca has more.
The Oak Ridge scientists are not human geneticists. They're part of the Department of Energy effort to increase efficiency in the production of biofuels from renewable resources like trees. But as they investigated the genes that controlled plant growth and development, they found that several of them had previously been associated with human diseases, including cancer and diabetes. It stands to reason that plants and humans would share genes. They're both made up of cells, and all cells have to perform certain basic functions. But a gene that accelerates the growth of cells might cause cancer in humans, whereas in trees, the same gene might just make bigger trees. Joe Palca, NPR News.
Japan is set to resume whale hunting for profit tomorrow, its first commercial whale hunt in more than 30 years. Tokyo announced last year it was leaving the International Whaling Commission and would start the practice again July 1st. The country has long said eating whale is an important part of its culture and that most species are not endangered. A global whaling moratorium was imposed in 1986, but Japan then began what it called scientific research whaling in the North Pacific and the Antarctic. I'm Janine Herbst, NPR News in Washington.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour. Welcome back, and this is the second hour of Fate Mag Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm Kat Hobson, your host. I am joined tonight by Lyle Blackburn, he's fascinating. This first hour has flown by. He is an author. He is a legend hunter, and that's what his books are about. He is a musician, and he is a television personality and a fantastic radio guest, I just have to say. Well, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
I'm enjoying it, too. You know, I love the opportunity to get to talk to someone who is very good at something that I am not. Or just because of a lack of experience. It's so fun to learn new things. When we were talking earlier, we were talking about people who need to educate themselves not only about the history of the things that they're wanting to go out and investigate, and some people are so sure that they want to experience them, but sometimes looking for scat and trace evidence is a good thing without the experience. It's good to learn how to do the whole part of that. But they also, as you said, need to learn basic survival if they're going to be going out in the field, right? That was interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something people need to think about in terms of cryptozoology, because most of these creature reports are in wooded areas, rural areas, places like that, as opposed to just, a ghost in your neighbor's house. So it adds that extra level of danger. Mm-hmm. I mean, not that ghost hunting doesn't have that. If you're going into some of these abandoned buildings, certainly that's dangerous. But, in terms of going into rural and wooded areas, swampy areas, or wherever you might be going, or camping, there's that aspect of something you need to, think about when you go.
And respect.
Certainly respect for nature, but that's one reason I like doing this. I've always grown up, my father was an avid bow hunter, and from as far back as I can remember, I went with him to the hunting lease and experienced a lot of camping trips and things. So I always loved the outdoors, and then, fascinated with cryptozoology and movie monsters and all that. Once I realized that there might be weird creatures lurking in the woods, then I'm like, okay, this is even better, because I love camping and hiking and canoeing, and now I might see something strange. So that was always like really, the ultimate thing for me.
I like all of those things too, but my grandmother used to say that my idea of camping was the lobby of a Holiday Inn. That's not really true, but I do like turn down service, and you don't usually get that in my tent. But when you were out all those years doing your time with your dad, with your hunting, camping, and such, did you have anything that made you go, occur?
Nothing really happened when I was a kid. And, I think one thing was I probably wasn't paying attention or looking for something strange, or think about it. But I was also hunting in a part of Texas, as far as the hunting, that wasn't there. There's just very few Bigfoot sightings or any other sort of sightings, like reports like that at all, because it's in Texas. People be surprised at how many Bigfoot reports there are, but it's all concentrated in the eastern portion of the state, which is very heavily wooded. It's the piney woods area. Where we were in central and south and western parts of Texas, there just is very little. There wasn't, the thick pine trees and stuff. So, I didn't see anything. Now, later on, as I was in East Texas, later on in high school and beyond that, in which I actually used to go to graveyards and do some ghost research. And within that, some strange things happened in the woods. On an occasion where I was at the back of the cemetery in the dark at night, myself and one other person, and some sort of I call it an animal. It definitely was an animal, but an animal I couldn't identify made a very strange sound, and it scared me so bad I literally ran from that cemetery, which I'm usually not frightened. I mean, I was out there in the first place with no flashlights, the moonlight or whatever. But so later on, as I was doing stuff in East Texas, things started happening that were weird that I look back at and go, wonder what that was. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a hog, it wasn't a dog. I'm not sure what it was. And, you start looking back and you think, wow, maybe I was, maybe something happened that was cryptid related. I don't know.
Interesting. I know that I have had experiences of hearing things because I don't go to cemeteries very often, but I do go to rural areas to do home investigations and things of that nature. It's bizarre sometimes the sounds that you'll hear in the woods. It's just, and I am not a woods person. I don't hunt. I really have never hunted. I do hike and I do canoe and kayak, but I've heard things that would give me pause also. And I've got to tell you that I think I'd just about rather run into a Bigfoot than a irritated hog any day. Because those things are tough. We have a question that says, and you and I had talked about this a little bit. I didn't know that this was going to come up, but this is a little different from what we were discussing. Do you believe in the alien aspect of Bigfoot, or perhaps even the interdimensional, like the cases where there's reported flashes of light or light shimmer and such?
Well, I wouldn't say I believe. Believe is a strong word for any of this. So I don't necessarily believe in that. I don't necessarily, in all the interviews I've conducted, which have the vast majority have been Bigfoot encounters, I don't get the feeling that these are extraterrestrials or that they have extraordinary interdimensional capabilities. Animals can do amazing things. They can do things that, when in the right circumstances, with the right wherewithal to stay hidden, could appear to disappear in the woods when, we would think they went through a portal, when actually they just simply disappeared in the woods because their hair, their fur is made to mimic the shadows of the forestry, and they're also good. I did some survival training with some Marines, and I'm telling you, these guys could be right in front of you, and you didn't even see them. It was amazing. They knew how to blend in, and they knew how to break up their outline with very simple techniques that made them seem, very Rambo-like, extraordinary. Yes. And so I've always looked at Bigfoot and many of the cryptids just in terms of terrestrial creatures, biological entities that have improbably, but not impossibly stayed hidden. And until I have proved or disproved that, to go further into that these are aliens and this and that, just is something I don't really need. I just don't subscribe to. I understand why people would have those theories, is because the longer it takes us to prove these, the more extraordinary theories we offer. The only time I've really researched that phenomenon is in terms of the Momo, the Missouri Monster case, in my new book, because it was heavily associated with UFO activity going on at the time, and many of the researchers who investigated that case back in the 1970s were some of the original MUFON investigators, because at the time there wasn't a lot of Bigfoot researchers, and as well, since there was some weird skyward activity, they just were looking at it in terms of maybe Momo is an extraterrestrial. So, but even in terms of that, there was no real connection that you could definitively draw between the sightings of the creature and what was seen in the sky, because ultimately nobody ever saw or said they saw a Bigfoot-like creature exit a spacecraft. So, or even prove that these were spacecrafts from another planet. These are just strange lights, and no one can explain them. But there's a lot of levels of conjecture to go from hairy ape-like creature in the woods to it came from billions of light years away from another planet. So that's my thoughts on it.
I tend to lean that way myself, because it just doesn't make sense. Everybody assumes that aliens are hyper intelligent and so much more evolved than we are, and all these other things. And then Bigfoot creatures, anything of that nature, does not appear to be an advanced civilization. Or maybe they're smarter than we are because they live out in the woods and they don't have to worry about mortgages and stuff. But either way, I just don't get the whole leaping to interstellar travel as how they get here, and then they can just beam in and out like Scotty. I don't think that's logical. Just my opinion.
Yeah, can't say absolute, but doesn't seem likely to me. And I noticed that I get those questions. I get usually if I'm among people who research Bigfoot primarily or are interested in that, their questions are usually related to sort of the terrestrial basis or theory of Bigfoot. When I go to, if I go to a conference or something, or so I'm speaking at a paranormal conference that has people interested in other disciplines or phenomenons, almost the very first question I get is, do you think Bigfoots are from outer space? Like, I notice a certain demographic of people ask that question. So I think it's just a curiosity, and especially based in people's own interests as to why that question comes up frequently.
Well, and there is a bit of scuttlebutt going about the internet and other sources about that. So, they're seeing it out there, I think, and it's giving them pause. So that's pretty cool. At least they're thinking. And oh my gosh, we're up against a break. I don't even know where these minutes go anymore. But we will be back again with Lyle Blackburn. Thank you so much for listening to Fate Mag Radio, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats.
The first known sighting of a ghost took place right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the late 1860s during the administration of Ulysses Grant.
Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998.
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
It's a place where UFO hunters and scientists gather to examine paranormal activity in the region.
Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right?
On the paranormal, will we see U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign policy go intergalactic in a quest for gold stolen by aliens? We'll tell you at least how the White House responded to claims the chief executive has been teleporting to Mars. But let's get to today's Capitol account.
UFOs, hauntings, psychic abilities, conspiracy, ESP, cryptozoology. There are many things that remain unexplained in the inexplicable world around us, and we're talking about them here, looking for answers on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama. The truth is out there.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, and I'm so glad to have you here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I am enjoying my conversation with our guest tonight, Lyle Blackburn. And during the break, we were discussing the fact that my husband had sent me a link, an MSN link, a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, that is so cool. Because it was about you. And I didn't realize it. He said, isn't this the person coming on your show in a couple of weeks? And I said, well, that is. And it said, and it's a MSN link that he gets in his newsfeed. And it says, FBI opens its files on Bigfoot, reveals testing done on evidence reportedly from elusive beast. And it says, some of the best Bigfoot casts expert Lyle Blackburn possesses inside his home Saturday, May 27th, 2017 in Fort Worth, Texas. So they took the info from this 2017 interview with Godofredo A. Vasquez of the Houston Chronicle and used it in their MSN report. So kudos to you.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't even realize that. It seems like sometimes when you do an interview or something, it does have a life of its own and will be printed and reprinted forever. So that's awesome.
I just think that it's a neat thing because the photo of the cast is interesting because you have what looks like a juvenile and they're with a couple of adults or larger. Uh-huh. And I love that stuff.
Yeah, I've collected quite a few casts, just recasting or collecting ones that were famous or a variety of things or casting a few myself. But They vary in size. They certainly do. Big footprints, they've got some huge ones and some that would appear to be juvenile.
Have you actually run into living creatures while you're doing your explorations?
Living creatures? Like
of unknown origin? Unknown species.
I've never had a sighting that I could definitively say was, a cryptid, but there's been a handful of times in which, by virtue of the circumstances, I felt we may have been close or something may have been just out of sight. And in those times, every time I plunged into the woods with a flashlight in an attempt to see it, but it, evaded and ran off. So, I've never personally had a sighting. So,
I think that's neat, though, because I think part of our genetic makeup includes the awareness of energies around us, like if something is watching you. So that's interesting that you reacted like that. Also interesting that you ran after it. But you kind of have to, right? You don't want to just miss the opportunity.
Yeah, if I'm there and I legitimately think that there's something, the possibility of seeing an unknown creature myself, I'm certainly not going to waste the opportunity, even if it's, truth in point, I was in the Ocala National Forest in Florida in an area where there's been a lot of skunk ape sightings in Florida's Bigfoot, if you will. And something was banging on a tin can or I heard this, and then in trying to look at it, I could hear something first walking and then sort of bounding off, and whatever it was big. And, I was there with my longtime friend and researcher, Cindy Lee, and I just literally plunged into the woods immediately trying to get a glimpse of it. And it kind of kept one step ahead. I could not get close enough and it would move. And I'm, sure it could have been a skunk ape perhaps, but even if it was a bear or something else, I realized that it was a dangerous thing to do, but I'm just like,
but you have to check.
Yeah. And if we were in the area and this was skunk ape central, and I'm like, dude, I'm running after it.
Yeah. I think I would probably do that too if I had gone so far and if I had been researching for so long and I thought that I had the actual opportunity to see this, to lay eyes on it. I think that I would probably have gone also. I always say that I'm such a big sissy. I'm really not, because I can't imagine being that close and not trying to see what it is. Just amazing. That is so close.
Yeah, your heart's racing, and that was at another situation like that in Falk, where something appeared to have followed us down the bayou, and we heard it howl 6 times. I use howl loosely. It was some kind of a strange vocalization. As we got out of the swamp with our canoe and got just up on this hill where our camp was, whatever this thing was literally sounded off right there where we got out of the water. And we already knew it wasn't anything we could identify. We had heard it 4 other times already over a distance and then closer. And then when it was like that again, myself and my buddy Tom, we plunged down there with lights trying to see it, and it bounded off into the woods, and we couldn't walk through that bayou channel right there because it was deep and filled with alligators. But whatever it was ran off, and again, it was like you were thinking, oh my gosh, we could have been that close. I mean, it could have been just like yards away from seeing this big, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature. But unfortunately, animals, man, in their habitat, they have a huge advantage, and it just, slipped off into the darkness.
That is so aggravating. That had to be aggravating. To me, I would have just been like, no. I mean, you're following us. You know we're not here to hurt you. You're following us and you're watching us. Come on now. But I reason with ghosts too. So it doesn't work there either. But that is so close. How did it feel as you were coming back towards your campsite to feel that this thing was stalking you?
Once we realized that, because we had heard it quite a bit up the bayou, sound off 3 times, and that it wasn't very close. And then once we realized it was literally, I assume it had followed us. I don't know, but when it howled right outside where we got out of the water, it was, everything happened so fast that I didn't really think about, the gravity of the situation. It was only after, and you're thinking, whoa, wait a minute, this, all we can conjecture here is this thing had followed us and was that close. And then that's when you kind of go, yeah, maybe this isn't the best idea to be doing this, but hey, man, that's what we do. And, it's just, there's only been a few times like that where you just the right circumstances and everything. I'm not afraid to go into these locations, but something happens that suddenly you kind of feel like, wait a minute, I'm vulnerable here. And that's the few times where it's scary.
Well, I could understand that, but I mean, vulnerability will give you pause. And it's hard sometimes in the heat of the moment to recognize that. But I find it interesting that in both instances, they were large creatures, based on the sounds that you were hearing, and they ran from you. They were curious enough about you to follow you, and yet, they ran. Do you think if you had approached it slower, maybe instead of with the lights and running, do you think that would have had a different effect possibly? Or do you feel like they were just not going to be seen?
I felt in those cases that, it would have been impossible to sneak up. There was, when you're walking in those woods, I mean, your footfalls are just so loud. There really was no, I could assess in both instances, there was no way to sneak up. It was literally just sort of try to assertively approach and get it in the flashlight. I mean, we were assuming that, I assume both of those instances, that if I just got a little bit closer and shined that light, I could see, even if it was running off. But, there wasn't any like sort of meadow grass or any quiet area where, if that was the case, then I certainly would have approached very slow as opposed to just trying to get the light on it. But in those, you're just facing wooded areas with a lot of debris, sticks and leaves and all of that, where you were completely at a disadvantage in being stealthy.
Right. I was just curious because they are not, from what I have learned and read and researched, they are not particularly stealthy when they are following humans in the woods. But I don't know. I just think that why would they be getting so close if they were afraid when you turned around? So maybe they're not afraid. Maybe they're just like tantalizing.
It could, yeah, any number of things. I mean, wild animals themselves, some are shy and will dart away, and some of them can be curious. So it just depends on the creature as to whether they're, and it could be up to the individual if we're talking about Bigfoot or whatever, individual personalities. Some could be curious, and then some just know better and just stay hidden. So there's all those variables as to what motivates a creature to whether it's going to endanger its discovery by getting closer, or whether it's just going to do the smart thing and disappear into the woods. So,
right. Do you think that they comprehend that why people are out there? Do they comprehend, in your opinion, that they are the prize, as it were, the game? Even though you're not actively hunting, some people do. And because there's a large school of thought that you have to have a body. So I would not want that to happen. But do you think they're aware of that? It would have to be one that had human interaction.
Hard to say, but if you look at primate behavior, some primates are quite curious, and if there's some attribute of that in these similarly described creatures, then sure, they, their motivation could be, curiosity. Now, whether they're aware, I mean, they would just, I guess, logically be aware that we're not the average denizen of the forest, I mean, I guess they were rare. I mean, as opposed to seeing a deer or something, which they have seen over and over and over since they were born.
Or even bears and such that would be walking. Could be walking.
Right. So we would stand out. So, and by logic would dictate, if these creatures are real and they've avoided discovery, then they have to be above average intelligence for an animal, because otherwise they would have just dumbed their way into just, they would just, walk into the Dairy Queen on accident or whatever.
Right.
So, you just kind of got to put kind of it's like what would be software code, if they do exist, and, if they have remained undiscovered, then they must have some exceptional abilities, and they must have some amount of intelligence, which, makes them want to be stealthy and to stay hidden for the most part. I mean, they have to cross roads, but
right. And that's where they get seen. Oftentimes, is when they're having to travel, and they do get into the areas where we travel as well. So,
right.
I just find this whole topic fascinating, because I have enjoyed so much the reading that I do on this. It's just and knowing that someone I trust, who I know to be a really good researcher and woodsman, tells me that there is a fairly large population living in family units in this area, makes me go, I have got to get this leg better, because I've got to get out there. I don't think I can climb rocks and stuff yet safely, but I find it so, it's just fascinating. I would love to be able to just experience any kind of interaction, whether it's just the knocks or other things. I do know that there have been incidences where there was a person that sounded like they were being carried away. That gave me pause, and that happened here. And when it was reported to the rangers, they said that they didn't have a report of a missing person. And sometimes people don't get reported missing. if they're homeless or traveling through woods. So that actually gave me pause, because I don't want to be a statistic either. I don't want to be somebody that shows up in the missing people things.
Yeah.
Not my color Kool-Aid. But have you heard of people experiencing stuff like that? Have you heard of humans? Oh, we've got 3 minutes, but have you heard of humans having negative experiences, being harmed, or just disappearing from an expedition?
I mean, there's accounts where Bigfoot-like creatures have, allegedly attacked people, harmed them, stalked them, injured them, any number of those. Not necessarily from an expedition. I don't know, think offhand where people actually went into the field for the purpose of cryptid research that, encountered a creature that attack them. All the attacks come from just people who were there in the woods. They were camping. They were stranded in the woods with a flat tire or what have you. And there's quite a good number of these alleged attacks from, obviously, the lizard man we talked about, and to Bigfoot. Quite a few over the years, if you look in the long term.
That gives you pause. Or it gave me pause. Because I was, and I am planning still to go out, but I think that becoming aware of that made me much more logistically oriented. And I'm always a safety girl, but to make sure that I had adequate protection for something that big and stuff. Yeah. It's just something that I hadn't really considered as an issue. So I guess I'm still mesmerized by Harry and the Hendersons. I would love to find Harry. And I don't think I'm going to find that. So, but you know what? We're up against another break, and this is our final break. If you have questions, please get them to me so that we can get them to Lyle, and we will be right back. Join us for our final segment.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. The best in paranormal Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the final segment of Fate Mag Radio. I hope that you've been enjoying this show, and you know what? If you had to miss something, not anything to worry about. You can catch our archives. You'll find us on iHeart, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, Podbean, so many others, but those are the ones that most people have easy access to. And just go and check us out. You can look under WBHM-DB, or you can look under Fate Mag Radio on iTunes or iHeart. We're also under Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you want to be. It's kind of like a Visa. Yeah. But I hate seeing this come to an end, but I have been having the best time with you, Lyle. Thank you for being here again. I have just loved this conversation.
Absolutely.
And now your newest book, I want to get this in before we go anywhere. Your newest book is The Missouri Monster, Momo. Did I do those backwards?
Let's see. Momo, The Strange Case of the Missouri Monster.
Yes. And I actually have the graphic in front of me, so no excuse for getting that wrong. But this has actually been filmed also, so this is a big, exciting time.
Yes, this is the year of Momo, and Momo being the abbreviation for the state abbreviation for Missouri, MO, and monster. So it's the Missouri Monster was a sort of a famous Bigfoot case that occurred back in the 70s in Missouri, and one that I've always been fascinated with over the years. I wanted to cover this within my Beyond Boggy Creek book, which I detailed the southern Bigfoot history, but the case was much bigger and there was much more to it. So it ended up being a standalone book, and that came out recently this spring. And that, covers all the phenomenon of the creature sightings and all this UFO activity and weird stuff like disembodied voices. It was just a really, really weird case, as well as there's been sightings of, these hairy upright creatures, over the years throughout Missouri. And then our next film that's going to come out with the Small Town Monsters documentary series is going to be the Missouri Monster. So the timing is lined up here for the book to be released, and then I will. I'm involved in those films. A lot of times I narrate them or help with the script, or sometimes I'm in the movies. And I'm heavily in Momo. I'm basically the on-screen host and appear in the film quite a bit. So it's going to be cool, and that's going to be coming out in October.
Well, that's really a big deal. I know that was not a monster I was familiar with. I've been primarily focusing on East Coast as I was going through my reading and trying to educate myself. But this has been around forever. Well, not forever, but for a very long time.
Yeah, since 1972 could be like forever for some of our listeners.
That's
not
true.
Long ago, or could
They're
have been
forever.
a short skip. But it's just one of those that I've seen one of these maps that they post online. In fact, you can buy this cool cryptid map, and each state has a monster associated with it, a famous cryptid. And South Carolina, they have the lizard man, and then Arkansas has the Fouke monster, Boggy Creek, and West Virginia has the Mothman and things like that. And Momo represents the Missouri Monster. So I started looking at that map going, wow, at some point maybe I will write books on every single one of those cases of what I guess people consider some of the most famous cryptids or representative of each state. So, it's just one that if people that research Bigfoot probably hear of it, and people who read book on strange phenomenon in the Midwest, but that's one that I thought deserved more coverage and a definitive book. So that's exactly what I did.
I think that's fantastic. You know, when I first started learning about you, I did not realize just how much you had put out. Your body of work is huge. And I want you to let people know, I put in our chat room www.lyleblackburn.com, and I also put www.smalltownmonsters.com. Is there another link that we need to put out?
No, yeah, my band is ghoultown.com, but if you visit lyleblackburn.com, it's got links to everything there, all the books, and of course my books are available on Amazon and, in electronic format and things like that, as well as from my own online store if you want autographed copies and things. So, just hit lyleblackburn.com. That's the best way to figure out what all this stuff I've done and links therein.
And you're going to be there a while. Just saying. Because it's like a rabbit hole. You click links and you just go adventuring. So be prepared. And I love that you can get autographed copies that way, because none of mine are. So they will be in the future. But where are you going to be appearing in the near future?
Well, I've got some appearances coming up, starting, usually kind of in the spring and the fall. So starting the first weekend in September, I'll be at the Horror Hound Horror Convention in Indiana. And specifically for you, there is the first annual Alabama Bigfoot Conference on October 4th and 5th. So
yes,
and I will be at that. Speaker at that, so that'd be awesome. We can hang out. And then Texas Bigfoot Conference in mid-October. So those are what I got lined up so far for the fall. But all these are listed on my website with links to the events.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting to meet you face to face and getting to hear you as well. This Alabama Bigfoot Conference is going to be interesting. We just had a Alabama Paranormal and Bigfoot Conference recently, and I am actually going to be speaking at the one in Orange Beach, the Paranormal and Bigfoot Conference down there. So it's kind of fun. We've got a group, Abnormal Alabama, that's doing all of this stuff together, and Kelsey Graham is the person who is putting that together. So you just never know what's going to turn up here. I love it.
Right, absolutely.
What other projects are you looking at as far as, I know you're going to be promoting Momo, obviously, because of everything that's going on with it and it's new. What else do you anticipate putting out in the near future? What's your next monster?
The next monster. Well, I've actually been working on a book that focuses more on certain types of areas, as opposed to what I've usually done, where it dwells on a single case. So this is one that over the years I've kind of collected reports and things like that from different areas, and there's typically swampy areas and things. So I started to notice a pattern of these particular areas that had a lot of strange phenomenon. So the book is more of an undertaking because it covers a lot more ground, but that's currently what I'm working on, as well as a new album with my band, which I slip in there periodically between books. I sort of juggle both. It keeps me fresh with both things, and so yeah, always a lot of work going on, but a lot of fun stuff.
Well, you wouldn't do it if you didn't like it, would you?
Well, that's right. I certainly wouldn't. So I'm fortunate that it's fun.
I know, right? I love that. So when it works out that way, life is good. It's pretty good anyway, but fun is just the icing on the cake. Well, I've got to tell you, I have so much enjoyed you being here. It's been just fantastic, and I've learned so much. I have 2 pages of notes. I love to learn. And since this is a subject that is not really my primary focus until now, I have learned a lot. Thank you for sharing.
Well, you're welcome. Always glad to pass on the information. I appreciate the opportunity to share that with the listeners as well.
Well, they have enjoyed it too. There's it's been some fantastic comments, interesting questions, and fantastic comments. So I appreciate that. And I do want to let everyone know that tomorrow night, Denise Pridemore will be on with the Paranormal Pride. And after that, we will not be running live shows until next Sunday. So thank you so much for being here. Next week, I will be hosting Jack Kenna. And how bad can that be, right? The man is brilliant and witty and charming and a great person to interview, much like tonight's guest. And I think that's going to be something you're going to enjoy. So everybody have a fantastic week. Enjoy your 4th of July celebration. I'll catch you back here next week. Same cat time, same cat channel. Thank you for enjoying Fate Magazine. And you know what? You need to go get that subscription renewed, because there is a brand new edition that has just hit the printer. It's going to be out before you know it. And check out fatemag.net to go and get that taken care of so you never miss an episode. Lyle, thank you again. I've enjoyed you. And I look forward to getting a chance to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, sounds awesome. I guess I'll see you in Alabama.
Absolutely. It's a fun place. You'll like it. So, good night, everyone. Thanks for listening.
You are listening to WPHM Digital Broadcasting. The best in paranormal talk radio.